The Riddle of Krishna. Krishna is the hero of the Mahabharata. Really speaking, the Mahabharata is principally connected with the Kauravas and the Pandavas. It is the story of the war fought by the two for right to the kingdom which belonged to their ancestors. They should be the principal characters, but they are not. It is Krishna who is the hero of the epic. This is a little strange thing. But what is stranger still is the possibility of him, Krishna, not being a contemporary of the Kauravas and Pandavas. Krishna was the friend of the Pandavas who had their empire. Krishna was the enemy of Kansa who also had his empire. It does not seem possible that two such empires should subsist side by side at once and at the same time. Secondly, in the Mahabharata, there is nothing to show that there was any intercourse between the two empires. The two stories of Krishna and the Pandavas have been mixed together at some later date in order to provide Krishna with a larger theatre to play a bigger part. The mixture of the two stories is the result of a deliberate design on the part of Vyas to glorify Krishna and to raise him above all. In the hands of Vyas, Krishna is God among men. That is why he is made the hero of the Mahabharata. Does Krishna really deserve to be called God among men? A short sketch of his life alone will help to give a correct answer. Krishna was born at Mathura at midnight on the 8th day of the month of Bhadra. His father was Vasudeva of the Yadu race, and his mother Devaki, daughter of Devaka, the brother of Ugrasen, king of Mathura. Ugrasen's wife had an illicit connection with Drumila, the Dhanava king of Saubha. From this illicit connection was born Kansa, who was in a sense the cousin of Devaki. Kansa imprisoned Ugrasen and usurped the throne of Mathura. Having heard from Narada or Daivavani, a voice from heaven, that Devaki's 8th child would kill him, Kansa imprisoned both Devaki and her husband and killed 6 of their children as they were born one after another. The 7th child, Balarama, was miraculously transferred from Devaki's womb to that of Rohini, another wife of Vasudeva. When the 8th child, Krishna, was born, he was secretly borne by his father to the other side of the river Yamuna, where Nanda and his wife Yashoda, natives of Raja, were then living. The Yamuna rolled back her waters to make way for the divine child. The Ananta, the chief of serpents, protected him with his ample hood from the heavy torrent of rain that was then falling. By a previous arrangement, Vasudeva exchanged his son for Nanda's newly born daughter, Yogindra or Mahamaya, and presented the latter to Kansa as his 8th child. But she flew away, telling him that the child which is being brought up by Nanda and Yasoda would kill him. This led Kansa to make a series of unsuccessful attempts to kill the child Krishna. With this object, he sent to Vraja a number of asuras in various forms. The killing of these asuras and number of other heroic deeds, impossible for any ordinary human child, are the chief staple of the Puranic account of Krishna's early life. Some of them are mentioned in the Mahabharata also. As might be expected, the authorities differ largely in their narration of these facts. I mention only some of them, following chiefly the latter authorities. The first, or one of the first of these, is the killing of Putana. She was Kansa's nurse and was sent by him to kill Krishna in the form of a female vulture, according to Harivamsa, and in the form of a beautiful woman, according to the Bhagavata. As she, pretending to suckle Krishna, put her poisoned breast into his mouth, he sucked it so powerfully as to draw out her very lifeblood, so that she fell down with a yell and died. Krishna performed another of these feats when he was only 3 months old. It was the breaking of a sakata, a cart which was used as a cupboard and had several jars and pans full of milk and curd arranged on it. According to the Harivamsa, Sakata was an asura sent by Kansa and had entered the cart intending to crush the infant Krishna by its weight. However, Yasoda had placed the boy under the cart and gone to bathe in the Yamuna. On her return, she was told that he had kicked against it and broken it to pieces with all that lay on it. This event surprised and frightened Yasoda, and she offered pujas to avert the evils threatened by it. When Putana and Sakata's attempts to kill Krishna failed, Kansa sent another of his emissaries, an asura named Trinavarta, to attempt the same task. He came in the form of a bird and carried aloft the divine child, then only a year old. But he soon dropped down dead with the child safe and holding his throat tightly. The next feat was the breaking of two Arjuna trees growing side by side. They are described as the bodies of two yakshas who were converted into this form by a curse and who were released by this feat of Krishna. When he had learned to crawl about and could hardly be kept out of mischief, Yasoda tied him with a rope to a wooden mortar and went to mind her household duties. When she was out of sight, Krishna began to drag the mortar after him till it stuck fast between the trees. Still pulling the heavy weight after him, he uprooted the trees and made them fall down with a tremendous noise, himself remaining unhurt by them. Now these events filled Nanda with fear, and he seriously thought of leaving Vraja and moving to another settlement. While he was thus thinking, the place was infested with wolves which made great havoc among the cattle and made it quite unsafe. This fixed the wavering intention of the nomads, and they moved with all their belongings to the pleasant woodland named Vrindavan. Krishna was then only 7 years old. After his removal to this new settlement, Krishna killed quite a large number of asuras. One of them was Arishta, who came in the form of a bull, another Kesin, who was disguised as a horse, 5 others, Vratasura, Bakasura, Aghasura, Bhaumasura and Sankasura, the last a yaksha. More important than these was Kaliya, a snake chief, who lived with his family in a whirlpool of the Yamuna and thus poisoned its water. Krishna one day threw himself on Kaliya's hood and danced so wildly as to make him vomit blood. He would thus have killed him, but on the intervention of the snake's family, he spared him and allowed him to move away to another abode. The subjugation of Kaliya was followed by Vastraharana, the carrying of clothes, a hard nut to crack for worshippers and admirers of the Puranic Krishna. The whole narration is so obscene that even the merest outlines will, I fear, be felt to be indelicate. But I must give them in as decent a form as is possible to make my brief account of Krishna's doings as full as I can. Some gopis, young maidens, had dived into the waters of the Yamuna for a bath, leaving their clothes on the banks, as is said to be still the custom in some parts of the country. Krishna seized their clothes and with them climbed upon a tree on the riverside. When asked to return them, he refused to do so unless the women approached the tree and each begged for her own dress for herself. This they could do only by coming naked out of the water and presenting themselves naked before Krishna. When they did this, Krishna was pleased and he gave them their clothes. This story is found in the Bhagavata. The next of Krishna's feats was the uplifting of the Govardhan hill. The Gopas were about to celebrate their annual sacrifices to Indra, the god of rain, and began to make grand preparations for it. Krishna pointed out to them that as they were a pastoral and not an agricultural tribe, their real gods were kine, hills, and woods, and them only they should worship, and not such gods as the rain-giving Indra. The Gopas were convinced, and giving up their intention of worshipping Indra, celebrated a grand sacrifice to the hill Govardhan, the nourisher of kine, accompanied with feasting and dancing. Indra was, as he could not but be greatly enraged at this affront offered to him, and as punishment he poured rain on the Gopa settlement for 7 days and 7 nights continually. Krishna, nothing daunted, uprooted the hill and held it up as an umbrella over the settlement, and thus protected the Gopas and their cattle from the ruinous effects of Indra's wrath. Krishna's youthful career was full of illicit intimacy with the young women of Vrindavan, which is called his Rasa Leela. Rasa is a sort of circular dance in which the hands of the dancers, men and women, are joined together. It is said to be still prevalent among some of the wild tribes of this country. Krishna, it is stated, was in the habit of often enjoying this dance with the young gopis of Vrindavan who loved him passionately. One of these dances is described in the Vishnu Purana, the Harivamsa, and the Bhagavata. All these authorities interpret the gopis' love for Krishna as piety, love to God, and see nothing wrong in their amorous dealings with him, dealings which, in the case of any other person, would be highly reprehensible according to their own admission. All agree as to the general character of the affair, the scene, the time and the season, the drawing of the women with sweet music, the dance, the amorous feelings of the women for Krishna, and their expression in various ways. But while the Vishnu Purana tries, not always successfully, to keep within the limits of decency, the Harivamsa begins to be plainly indecent, and the Bhagavata throws away all reserve and revels in indecency. Of all his indecencies, the worst is his illicit life with one gopi by the name Radha. Krishna's illicit relations with Radha are portrayed in the Brahmavaivarta Purana. Krishna is married to Rukmini, the daughter of King Rukmangad. Radha was married to Ayan. Krishna abandons his lawfully wedded wife Rukmini and seduces Radha, wife of another man, and lives with her in sin without remorse. Krishna was also a warrior and a politician even at a very early age, as early as when he was in his 12th year. Every one of his acts, whether as a warrior or as a politician, was an immoral act. His first act in this sphere was the assassination of his maternal uncle Kamsa. Assassination is not too strong a term for it, for though Kamsa had given him provocation, he was not killed in the course of a battle or even in a single combat. The story is that, having heard God Krishna's youthful feats at Vrindavan, Kamsa got frightened and determined to secure his death by confronting him with a great athlete in an open exhibition of arms. Accordingly, he announced the celebration of a Dhanuryagna, a bow sacrifice, and invited Krishna, Balarama, and their Gopa friends to it. Akrura, an adherent of Krishna but an officer of Kamsa, was deputed by the latter to bring the brothers to Mathura. They came determined to kill Kamsa. He had provoked not only them but other Yadavas also, whom his persecution had compelled to leave Mathura. The brothers were therefore supported by a conspiracy against him. Having arrived at Mathura, they desired to change their simple Gopa dress for a more decent one and asked for clothes from Kamsa's washerman, whom they met in the street. As the man behaved insolently with them, they killed him and took from his stock whatever clothes they liked. They then met Kubja, a hunchbacked woman who served as Kamsa's perfumer. At their request, she anointed them with sandal paste and in return was cured by Krishna of her bodily deformity. The Bhagavata makes him visit her on a subsequent occasion and describes his union with her with its characteristic indecency. However, on the present occasion, the brothers, anointed by Kubja and garlanded by Sudama, a flower seller, entered the place of sacrifice and broke the great bough to which the sacrifice was to be offered. The frightened Kamsa sent an elephant named Kuvalayapida to kill them. Krishna killed the elephant and entered the arena. There the brothers encountered Kamsa's chosen athletes, Chanura, Mustika, Toshalaka and Andhra. Krishna killed Chanura and Toshalaka and Balarama the other two. Frustrated in his plan of securing Krishna's death by stratagem, Kamsa ordered the brothers and their Gopa friends to be turned out and banished from his kingdom, their herds to be confiscated, and Vasudeva, Nanda, and his own father Ugrasen to be assassinated. At this, Krishna got upon the platform on which Kamsa was seated, and seizing him by the hair, threw him down on the ground and killed him. Having consoled Kamsa's weeping wives, he ordered a royal cremation for him, and refusing the kingdom offered him by Ugrasen, installed the latter on the throne and invited his banished relatives to return to Mathura. The next episode is Krishna's fight with Jarasandha, emperor of Magadha and Kalayavana. Jarasandha was the son-in-law of Kamsa. Enraged by Krishna's assassination of Kamsa, his son-in-law Jarasandha is said to have invaded Mathura 17 times and to have been every time repulsed by Krishna. Fearing, however, that an 18th invasion would be disastrous to the city, Krishna removed the Yadavas to Dwaraka at the west end of Gujarat peninsula. After the removal of the Yadavas from Mathura, the city was besieged by Kalayavana at the instigation of Jarasandha. While pursuing the unarmed Krishna, however, out of the city, the invader was burnt to ashes by fire issuing from the eyes of the king Muchakunda, who had been sleeping in a mountain cave and whom he had awakened with a kick, mistaking him for Krishna. Krishna defeated the army of Kalayavana, but while flying to Dwaraka with the booty, he was overtaken by Jarasandha. He, however, evaded his enemy by climbing a hill and flying to Dwaraka after jumping down from it. Krishna was now for the first time married. He married Rukmini, daughter of Bhishmaka, king of Vidarbha. Her father, at Jarasanda's advice, was making preparations to get her married to Shishupala, Krishna's cousin and king of Chedi. But Krishna carried her off on the day before the proposed marriage. The Bhagavata says she had fallen in love with Krishna and had addressed a love letter to him. This does not seem to be true, for Krishna did not remain a true and faithful husband of Rukmini. Rukmini was gradually followed by an enormously vast army of co-wives till the number of Krishna's consorts rose to 16,108. His children numbered 180,000. The chief of his wives were the well-known 8, Rukmini, Satyabhama, Jambavati, Kalindi, Mitrabinda, Satya, Bhadra, and Lakshmana. The remaining 16,100 were married to him on the same day. They belonged originally to the harem of King Naraka of Prajyotish, whom Krishna defeated and killed at the invitation of Indra, whose mother's earrings had been carried away by Naraka. While paying a visit after the battle to Indra's heaven in company with Satyabhama, this lady took fancy to Indra's famous Parijat tree. To oblige his wife, Krishna had to fight with the god whom he had just favored. Indra, though the chief of the Vedic gods, and though he was helped by the latter on this occasion, was indeed no match for the incarnation of the Supreme Being, and was forced to part with his favorite flower tree, which was thus carried to Dwaraka and planted there. The story of how he obtained his chief 8 wives is very interesting. The story of how he got Rukmini is already told. Satyabhama was the daughter of Satyajit, a Yadava chief, who gave her away in marriage to Krishna because he was afraid of him and wished to buy his favor. Jambavati was the daughter of Jambavana, a bear chief, against whom Krishna waged a long war to recover a precious gem he had taken away from a Yadava. Jambavana was defeated and presented his daughter to Krishna as a peace offering. Kalindi went through a series of austerities in order to get Krishna as her husband, and her devotion was rewarded by the marriage she had sought. Mitrabinda was a cousin of Krishna and was carried off by him from the Swayamvara grounds. Satya was the daughter of Nagnajit, king of Ayodhya, and was won by Krishna when he had achieved a brave feat of arms, namely killing a number of naughty bulls belonging to Nagnajit. Bhadra was another cousin of Krishna and was married by him in the usual way. Lakshmana was the daughter of Brihatsena, king of Madra, and was carried off by him from the Swayamvara grounds. Krishna's part in Arjuna's marriage with Subhadra, sister of Balarama and Krishna's half-sister, is noteworthy. In the course of his travels, Arjuna arrived at the holy place of Prabhasa and was received by Krishna on the hill of Raivataka. There he was enamored of Subhadra and asked Krishna how he could get her. Krishna advised him to carry her off as a brave Kshatriya without depending upon the chances of a Swayamvaram, the usual Kshatriya form of marriage. The Yadavas were at first enraged at this outrage, but when Krishna convinced them that Arjuna would be a very worthy husband for Subhadra, and that by carrying her off he had done nothing unworthy of a hero, they consented to the union. And how could they do otherwise? Krishna did not simply argue like us poor talkers. He, as we have already seen, had backed his precepts by his example. It is interesting to note how Krishna disposed of Jarasandha and Shishupala, who created trouble at the Rajasuya performed by Yudhishthira. Jarasandha had imprisoned a large number of kings and intended to sacrifice them to Rudra. Unless he was killed and the imprisoned princess released and given an opportunity to pay homage to Yudhishthira, the latter's claim as emperor could not be established. Krishna therefore proceeded with Bhima and Arjuna to Rajagriha, Jarasandha's capital, and challenged him to a single combat with any one of them he might choose. Such a challenge could not be refused by a Kshatriya, and Jarasandha, at the anticipation of death at his opponent's hand, declared his son Sahadev as his heir apparent and chose Bhima as his opponent. The combat lasted 13 days, and Jarasandha at length met with a painful death at his rival's hand. Having put Sahadev on his father's throne and invited the released princess to attend Yudhishthira's Rajasuya, Krishna and his friends returned to Indraprastha. In due course, the Rajasuya came off. Of the various functions and duties connected with the ceremony, Krishna is said to have taken charge of washing the feet of the Brahmins. This is a sure indication of the comparative modernness of the Mahabharata, or at any rate of this story. For in ancient times, even when the supremacy of the Brahmins had been established, the Kshatriyas never paid them any servile honor. However, when the sacrifice was over, the time came for Yudhishthira to make presents to the assembled princes, priests, and other persons deserving honor. To whom must honor be paid first? Yudhishthira, having asked Bhishma's opinion on the matter, the latter replied that Krishna was the person to be honored first. Accordingly, Sahadeva, at Yudhishthira's command, presented the Arghya, the mark of honor, to Krishna, and the latter accepted it. This upset Shishupala, who made a long speech challenging Krishna's right to the honor and abusing the Pandavas for paying any honor and Krishna for accepting it. Bhishma made another speech narrating Krishna's exploits and achievements at length and declaring his divinity. Shishupala rose again, rebutted Bhishma's arguments one after another, and grossly abused him. It is pointed out by Krishna's recent biographers that of the charges brought against Krishna by Shishupala, there is no mention of his dealings with the Vrindavan gopis, a sure indication, according to them, that when the Mahabharata was composed, the story of these dealings of Krishna, a story made so much of by the writers of the Puranas and the latter poets, was not conceived. However, at the end of Shishupala's speech, Bhishma, who saw that Yudhishthira was afraid lest Shishupala and his followers might obstruct the completion of the ceremony, said, addressing them, that if they were resolved to die, they might challenge the divine Krishna himself to fight. At this, Shishupala challenged Krishna, who rose in response and narrated his opponent's numerous misdeeds. Then, with the words, "At the request of his mother, my aunt, I have pardoned 100 of Shishupala's offences, but I cannot pardon the insulting words he has spoken of me before the assembled princes. I kill him before you all." He threw his chakra at him and cut off his head. Actions of Krishna during the Mahabharata war may now be reviewed. The following are some of them. When Satyaki, Krishna's friend, was hard-pressed by Bhurisrava, son of Somadatta, Krishna induced Arjuna to cut off his arms and thereby made it easy for Satyaki to kill him. 2. When Abhimanyu was unfairly surrounded and killed by 7 Kaurava warriors, Arjuna vowed the death of the ringleader, Jayadratha, next day before sunset, or failing that, his own death by entering into fire. When the sun was about to set and Jayadratha remained unslain, Krishna miraculously hit the sun, on which Jayadratha, having come out, Krishna uncovered the sun, and Arjuna killed Jayadratha when he was unaware. 3. Despairing of Drona being ever killed by fair means, Krishna advised the Pandavas to kill him unfairly. If he could be made to cast down his arms, he could, Krishna said, be killed easily. This could be done if he was told that his son Aswathama was dead. Bhima tried the suggested device. He killed an elephant named after Drona's son and told him that Aswathama was killed. The warrior was somewhat depressed by the news but did not quite believe it. At this juncture, he was hard-pressed by a number of sages to cease fighting and prepare himself for heaven with meditations worthy of a Brahmana. This checked the hero still more, and he applied to the truthful Yudhishthira for correct information about his son. Finding Yudhishthira unwilling to tell a lie, Krishna overcame his reluctance by a long exhortation, in the course of which he announced his ethics of untruth in the following edifying text from Vasishta's Smriti. In marriage, in amorous dealings, when one's life is in danger, when the whole of one's possession is going to be lost, and when a Brahman's interest is at stake, untruth should be told. The wise have said that speaking untruth on these 5 occasions is not a sin. Yudhishthira's scruples were stifled, and he said to his preceptor, "Yes, Ashwathama is killed," adding in a low voice that he is an elephant, which last words, however, were not heard by Drona. His depression was complete, and on hearing some bitterly reproachful words from Bhima, he gave up his arms, and while sitting in a meditative posture, was killed by Drishtadyumna. 4. When Bhima was unsuccessfully fighting with Duryodhana by the side of the Dvaipayana lake, Krishna reminded him through Arjuna that he had vowed the breaking of his opponent's thighs. Now, striking a rival below the navel was unfair. But as Duryodhana could not be killed except by such an unfair means, Krishna advised Bhima to adopt the same, and Bhima did. The death of Krishna throws a flood of light on his morals. Krishna died as the ruler of Dwaraka. What was this Dwaraka like, and what sort of death awaited him? In founding his city of Dwaraka, he had taken care to settle thousands of unfortunates there. As the Harivamsa said, "O hero, having conquered the abodes of the Daityas, giants, with the help of brave Yadus, the Lord settled thousands of public women in Dwaraka. Dancing, singing, and drinking by men and women, married and prostitutes, filled the city of Dwaraka. We get a description of a sea trip in which these women formed a principal source of enjoyment. Excited by their singing and dancing, the brothers Krishna and Balarama joined in the dancing with their wives. They were followed by other Yadava chiefs and by Arjuna and Narada. Then a fresh excitement was sought. Men and women all fell into the sea, and at Krishna's suggestion, the gentlemen began a Jalakrida water sport with the ladies, Krishna leading one party and Balarama another, while the courtesans added to the amusement by their music. This was followed by eating and drinking, and this again by a special musical performance in which the leaders themselves exhibited their respective skill in handling various musical instruments. It will thus be seen what a jolly people these Yadavas were, and with what contempt they would have treated the objections urged nowadays by the Brahmins and such other purists against Nach parties, dance parties, and the native theatres. It was in one of these revels, a drunken revel, that the Yadavas were destroyed. They, it is said, had incurred the displeasure of a number of sages by a childish trick played on the latter by some of their boys. These boys disguised Samba, one of Krishna's son, as a woman with a child, tying an iron pestle below his navel, and asked the sages to say what child the woman would give birth to. The enraged sage said she would produce an iron pestle, which would be the ruin of the Yadavas. Fearing the worst consequences from this curse, the boys took the pestle to the seaside and rubbed it away. But its particles came out in the form of erakas, a kind of reeds, and its last remaining bit, which had been thrown into the sea, was afterwards recovered and used by a hunter as the point of an arrow. Now it was with these erakas that the Yadavas killed themselves. They had gone in large parties to the holy place of Prabhasa. They indulged in drinking there, and this proved their ruin. The evils of drinking there had been found out at length by Krishna and some other Yadava leaders, and it was prohibited on pain of death by a public notification. But the prohibition had no effect. The drunken Yadavas at first quarrelled and then began to fight and kill one another. When some of Krishna's own sons were killed, he himself joined in the fight and killed a large number of his own people. He then went in search of Balarama. He found him in meditative posture and saw his spirit passing out of his body in the form of a large serpent, Seshanaga, the divine snake whom he had incarnated. Krishna now felt that it was time for him also to pass away. He then bade farewell to his father and his wives, telling them that he had sent for Arjuna, who would take charge of them. Then he seated himself under a tree, hidden by its leafy and outstretching branches, and composed his mind in meditation. While thus sitting, a hunter named Jara mistook him for a deer and hit him with an arrow, one pointed with the last remaining bit of the fatal pestle. Discovering his mistake, the man fell at Krishna's feet and was pardoned and flew away to heaven, illuminating all sides by its dazzling light. Arjuna came and proceeded towards Hastinapur with the surviving Yadavas, men and women. But his good genius having left him, he had lost the power of his hitherto mighty army and his unrivaled skill as an archer. A number of Ahiras, armed only with lathis, attacked his party and carried off many of the women, and he reached Hastinapur only with a small remnant. After Arjuna's departure, the sea engulfed Dwaraka, and nothing was left to speak of the Yadavas, their glories, their domestic broils, and their revels.